Mike Evans finishes a top 10 wide receiver last season. Can he make that jump into the top 5? What's up, Front Yardigans? Jay here to talk a little bit about Mike Evans' fantasy outlook for the 2022 season. And joining me today is Simon, also of Front Yard Fantasy. Simon, let's just go ahead and get right into it. What do you like about Mike Evans for the upcoming season?
Man, what do I not like about Mike Evans for the upcoming season? This is a wide receiver that I am very, very excited for, Jay. It's not someone that I'm just a little bit excited to talk about now. This is one of my favorite receivers. He's been someone I've been hyping up for years now. But this year, it feels like everything's falling into place for it to be the perfect season. Just a little bit of background on this guy that we're talking about before we jump into why he's going to kill it next year. He's got 8 straight years. That is every year he's been in the NFL, including his rookie year, with 1,000 yards receiving minimum. He's the closest thing to a guarantee in the NFL to do it again, especially with Tom Brady still throwing him the ball. Last season, he had 14 touchdowns, which was a career high. But in the 2 years he's been with Tom Brady in that offense, his touchdown totals are 13 and 14. So we can call it an anomaly compared to his average of around 9 touchdowns a season throughout his career. Or this could be who Mike Evans is with Tom Brady as his quarterback. Now, add to that, his biggest threat for touchdown receptions leaving the team and Rob Gronkowski, unless he comes back. But the biggest touchdown threat outside of Mike Evans on that team from a receiving standpoint has been Gronk whenever Gronk is there. He's no longer going to be on that team, keeping that touchdown upside high for Mike Evans. On top of that, of the top 5 targets on that team last year, only Mike Evans and Leonard Fournette are going to be healthy and on that team to start the season. Chris Godwin, obviously not going to start out that season, but he'll likely come back. Antonio Brown and Rob Gronkowski, as already mentioned, are gone, not playing on that team anymore. It would be preposterous to assume that Mike Evans wouldn't get more targets. I'm expecting a pretty big bump in targets, and if that touchdown upside stays there, man, the sky's the limit for a wide receiver of that talent with Tom Brady throwing him the ball.
Yeah, you make a lot of really good points. Not only has he had 1,000 yards in every season, in 6 of his 8 seasons, he's had 8 or more touchdowns. And the last one that he didn't have 8 touchdowns was 2017. He had 5. In these 2 seasons with Tom Brady, like you talked about, the games that he's had Chris Godwin on the field, he's averaged 15 points per game, which would be good enough last season for wide receiver 19. In the games that Chris Godwin has not been on the field with Tom Brady, Mike Evans has averaged 20.3 points per game, which put him as wide receiver 3 last season. So these games that Chris Godwin is going to miss this season, we still don't know. It feels like every other day you see a different report. He's ahead of schedule. There's no timetable for return. So I'm guessing, just in my mind for projection purposes, I'm thinking 6-ish games. That's consistently what I've seen. So that's a pretty good chunk. That's basically half of the fantasy regular season. He's going to be in the place to put up some pretty big numbers. They use him in the red zone. He had 19 red zone targets last year, the second most touchdowns for a wide receiver. And I think you said it perfectly. It's hard to depend on targets, but there's these guys that everybody says touchdown regression, the James Connors, the Adam Thielens, but these guys, maybe the reason that they're getting all these touchdowns is they play very specific roles and they have a specific skill set for these teams. So while, is he going to score 14 touchdowns again? Probably not, but it's definitely within the realm of possibility for him to double digits again. He's done it pretty consistently over his career. So, I'm with you. There's a lot to like about Mike Evans for this upcoming season.
You mentioned 6 of 8 seasons with a minimum of 8 touchdowns. And I mentioned the past 2 seasons with 13 and 14. But we didn't mention is in 4 of the 8 seasons, he's had at least 12. In half of his seasons, he's had at least 12 touchdowns. So it's not like this is an anomaly. I'm with you, Jay. And then the other thing you mentioned, Chris Godwin will come back, but it's not like we're talking about like a Hollywood Brown with DeAndre Hopkins coming back, where we assume they take the backseat role. Mike Evans is still a top tier fantasy option, even when Chris Godwin comes back. So that can give you some comfort. Maybe that upside goes away a little bit, but man, you got to love that.
Absolutely. Well, let's flip it on its head. What's something that you don't necessarily like for Mike Evans' outlook for this upcoming season?
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever you look back at his stats from last season, specifically in this Tom Brady offense, which whenever I'm kind of looking at Mike Evans now, I'm really, you can look at his whole career, but I'm looking at the time with Tom Brady. He is not the 150 target kind of guy on this team. He hovers between 100 and 120 targets, and his touchdowns are what make him. So if he gets the same target volume next year, let's just assume he's got that specific role you talked about. The player's leaving. It doesn't mean more targets for him. And he doesn't get more efficient with these targets. He just does what he does. And we give him his career average of 9 touchdowns. I think it's 9.37 is his career average. We'll call it 9. That would drop him down to wide receiver 20, which is not what you're drafting him to be. That would be a bad draft pick based on ADP. So there is a lot riding on his touchdowns, like we mentioned previously. And if those touchdowns don't fall his way, if Fournette runs a bunch of those in, if he takes a bigger role in the passing game, if Russell Gage comes in and starts stealing some of those, it could be bad for Mike Evans. Now, when we talk bad, though, it's not like wide receiver 50. We're talking, instead of being the top 5 kind of guy that we're talking about, he could be a wide receiver 2. So the downside is limited, but with what you're paying to draft him, that's where it is. It comes with the touchdowns. That's not a stat you like to rely on. But if there's any player in the NFL I had to bet they will score 10 receiving touchdowns next season, I would put my money on Mike Evans over Cooper Kupp. I love Cooper Kupp, but I would put my money on Mike Evans because that's what he does. That's where he makes his money.
Yeah, you make a lot of good points. They did bring Russell Gage over to fill that hole. He's not going to be Antonio Brown. He's not going to be Gronk or Chris Godwin, but he is a very capable pass catcher. On a bad Atlanta offense, he's got almost 800 receiving yards the past 2 years. Now, they do play different parts of the field. Russell Gage is more of the short intermediate passes, where obviously Mike Evans is a big play receiver, down the field type of guy. So they're going to play on different parts of the field, but it's not going to be 100% all funnel to Mike Evans. Russell Gage is capable, and there has been some talk, Tom Brady talking about that he's going to be needed for a big season, especially with Godwin out. Godwin is coming back. So, that I definitely think Mike Evans has that top 5 upside, not with Chris Godwin on the field. That's really going to be the big difference, is when Chris Godwin comes back. I am in the camp that does think that Rob Gronkowski is going to come back. I honestly think he's going to come back sooner rather than later. So you mentioned it. His ADP honestly is a tad high for me. I really was more comfortable when he was more in the 12 to 14 range. Right now at wide receiver 9, well, I love Mike Evans. I think he's definitely got the talent. If Chris Godwin wasn't playing this season, he'd be in talks for, I could see him, a handful of guys that could finish as the wide receiver 1. But as the ADP keeps rising, because it seems like people who haven't been on a Mike Evans are finally in on him. It only took 8 straight seasons of 1,000 yards, but it's just his ADP seems to continue to rise, and it worries me because of where that floor is with Chris Godwin. It's not a bottom of the barrel floor like a guy like Marquise Brown, like you said, where you have to worry about wide receiver 30, 40. But I don't want to draft a guy at wide receiver 9 that it's definitely within the realm of possibility for him to finish as a middle of the road wide receiver 2.
I get that. And it's definitely within the range of outcomes. But the counterpoint to that is, you mentioned it already. He's one of the few guys that has the kind of upside to finish as the number 1 overall wide receiver if things fall his way. And at wide receiver 9 price, even with that, say, floor of wide receiver 20, that's a gamble I'm willing to take with the history that Mike Evans has. But 100% agree with you that floor is scary if that's where you're drafting him.
Yep. Well, speaking of ADP, let's go ahead and get to a name game. And basically what this is going to be is I've got 5 names that are currently around Mike Evans ADP. Even, as things are going to move as we get closer to the season, I expect these 5 guys to be somewhere around where Mike Evans is drafting. This is basically, if you're on the clock, both of these guys are available. Who are you going to take? First one up, Tyreek Hill or Mike Evans?
Before I give you an answer, I'm just going to put a disclaimer at the front of this. I have Mike Evans as my PPR wide receiver 5 going into this season. That means there's a very short list of names ahead of him that I would pick. So this might be the world's easiest name game for me. But Tyreek Hill for Mike Evans, this one, they're in the same tier, but it's not particularly close for me on which one do I prefer for this coming season. They're both elite talents, right? We've seen it from them on the field. These are the kind of guys you want on your fantasy team. One of them, Mike Evans, is staying with the GOAT Tom Brady, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, definitely the best quarterback he's ever played with, and the quarterback that in back-to-back seasons has been responsible for 13 touchdown and 14 touchdown seasons for Mike Evans. Add on top of that, he's losing pieces. Tyreek Hill going to a brand new system with a brand new quarterback that, let's face it, Tua has upside, but he's not Patrick Mahomes. He's not Tom Brady that Mike Evans has thrown him the ball. And he's competing with Jalen Waddle, which we haven't seen before. We don't know who's going to be the primary target in that offense. I'll take the safety and consistency with Mike Evans.
The smart call is Mike Evans. I am super high on Tyreek Hill in this offense. I'm really excited. I think Mike McDaniel is going to use him in the Deebo role. That was part of the reason why he wanted to get out of Kansas City. He didn't like how he was being used. So, yes, I completely agree. Tua is definitely not Patrick Mahomes. Mike Evans is the safer call. I am just personally higher on Tyreek Hill. I think it's going to be easier for him to finish as, a top 5 wide receiver this season versus Mike Evans. Give me Tyreek Hill in this situation.
100% fair. I don't fault you at all.
Speaking of Deebo Samuel or Mike Evans?
Well, you may know my answer on this one, but it's going to be Mike Evans. And this isn't an anti-Deebo take. This was whenever I first heard Deebo doesn't want to be used as much in a rushing role and maybe he's going to have that work transitioned away from him. I got nervous. I overreacted. I moved Deebo way down in my rankings. Over the past month, I've gone back and I've looked at it multiple times. When you look at just Deebo's receiving work, he's still an unbelievable receiver. He had over 1,400 yards last season, and that was off of only 77 receptions, 18.2 yards per reception for that man. But with that, he only got 6 touchdowns. He's a similar target volume kind of guy to Mike Evans, but he's made his money on efficiency in that offense. That's another stat that I don't want to gamble on. I feel safer in Mike Evans' 10 touchdowns than I do in Deebo Samuel's 18 yards per reception. That's absurd. So I'll take Mike Evans in that offense. I think he's a little bit more necessary for that offense to operate as well.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I am going to go Mike Evans in the situation. Not only everything that you said, but also the uncertainty at quarterback. We don't know if it's going to be Jimmy Garoppolo. Is it going to be Trey Lance? What does this offense look like with Trey Lance? So those questions are enough for me to want to go Mike Evans in this situation. Here's one that might be a little harder for you, but I still think I know your answer. Your Clemson boy, T. Higgins or Mike Evans?
Well, I do love T. Higgins, Jay, and I am quite high on T. Higgins. It's not someone that I'm like sleeping on. I have T. Higgins as a top 10 wide receiver this year. That's no joke. But give me Mike Evans. Give me the guy who could be the one in this offense. Give me the guy that could lead their team in touchdowns. Give me the guy that, with Chris Godwin missing time, could lead their team in targets, receptions, touchdowns. Like every meaningful statistical category for a receiver, Mike Evans has a path to do that. T. Higgins, the only way he's leading in all of those stats is if Jamar Chase goes down injured. That doesn't mean there's not enough room for him to eat in that Bengals offense. There definitely is, but I'll take Mike Evans.
Yeah, I'm going with Mike Evans, and pretty much for every reason you said. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Somebody who I know you are also a big fan of, Keenan Allen or Mike Evans?
Yeah, I love Keenan Allen, but he has moved down in my rankings this year compared to previous seasons. He's been a guy I've been probably very high on in previous years that this year I'm probably about even with consensus on. And I think the big reason for that is the money that they threw at Mike Williams on that team. You cannot ignore that kind of wide receiver contract and what it screams about their intentions. Now, I'm not saying Mike Williams takes over as the wide receiver one and outscores Keenan Allen. I know a lot of people are projecting that, but I've got them real close. I've got them borderline back-to-back in my rankings. Keenan Allen, wide receiver 14, Mike Williams, wide receiver 16. They're going to eat into each other.
I am actually with you on that, and I could definitely see a scenario where Mike Williams jumps Keenan Allen as a guy. I think it is going to be more of a 1A and 1B situation more than it has been in the past. It's definitely something that could happen this season, but I'm with you. I'm going to go Mike Evans. And the final one, New Eagle A.J. Brown or Mike Evans?
All you had to say was New Eagle, and it didn't matter what name you said after that. You could have put the best wide receiver in the league after that, and the answer is Mike Evans. That's not to say there's not value to be had in this Eagles passing attack or in their receiving options at fantasy. But you're putting a wide receiver on a new team, new situation, new quarterback. And on top of that, this is the most rush-heavy team in the NFL. This team wants to run the ball with Jalen Hurts, Miles Sanders, Boston Scott. They've got a whole army of running backs and running quarterbacks there. And then there's Devonta Smith to compete with as well, who's already established in this offense. So I'll take the safety and the consistency of situation with Mike Evans.
Yeah, pretty much everything you said. The only thing I'll add is not only do you have Devonta Smith, you've also got a very capable pass-catching tight end in Dallas Goedert. So I don't trust Jalen Hurts, while I was really down on AJ Brown when this trade was initially made, I've thought about it, done a little research, and I do still think that AJ Brown is a high-end wide receiver. But I don't trust the passing volume that's going to happen. I don't trust Jalen Hurts' consistency as a pass thrower. So it's Mike Evans, and it's pretty easy for me.
Absolutely.
Well, that's pretty much it. Simon, any final thoughts when it comes to Mike Evans for this season?
God, I just love Mike Evans so much. Draft him before his draft price gets too high, because people are going to keep on hyping this guy up as training camp goes on. People are finally catching up. But the question you asked at the beginning, Jay, can Mike Evans make that jump into a top 5 PPR wide receiver? I think the answer is absolutely yes, and I have him ranked as such.
Yep, I completely agree. And let me ask you one more question. Where is the highest that you would draft? Where's the breaking point for you as a Mike Evans truther, where you would draft him? Wide receiver 5? I know you have him ranked there. Would you actually draft him as the wide receiver 5 off the board?
I don't see ever having to, but probably not. I like to draft for value. Mike Evans is an unbelievable value right now in my eyes, even with his rising ADP. But if it gets up that high, I'm probably shifting and grabbing value at the running back position or something else.
Yep, that's the key. It's all about the value. And I'm with you. I love Mike Evans, but starting to creep up where he's not as much of a value right now. So that's a little bit what's scaring me is top 5 upside, a little bit of downside, but I'm still drafting him now. But if he continues to creep up, I might wind up pivoting to something else. That's it for the Mike Evans Fantasy Outlook. Make sure you subscribe to our channel at Front Yard Fantasy. We're going to have a lot more Fantasy Outlook videos coming as the season continues to creep closer. Make sure you like the video and drop in the comments any players that you'd like us to do future videos on.
Yeehaw!